Afternoon, everyone. I'd like to share a few reflections about being a soldier. Really happy to get to share on this subject because I feel it's one of the most important messages that we've received in the last year or so. I don't know if any of you remember. I remember last summer, I think it was in July, we heard a message about that was titled "Every Last Giant." Do you remember that message? It was a message that really came home to my heart. And the basic gist of it was that when we signed the new agreement, so we're New Covenant Christian Fellowship, when we signed the new agreement is not Jesus is going to take me to heaven, but rather the new covenant is Jesus will save me from my sin. And as Romans 6:14 says, no sin should be master over us. And the way that that was interpreted for us and really came home to my heart was Jesus wants to give us victory over every single last giant. And that message really stuck with me. And one thing, I actually went back and looked at my notes, and one thing that really blessed me from that message that stuck with me is this. I'm reading my verbatim notes at least. We signed up originally because we love the look of forgiveness and freedom. That's what we have this burden of guilt from our sin. And when we hear about the good news of Jesus Christ, we may not know all of the terms and conditions of the agreement, so to speak, but we hear, wow, deliverance from my guilt, deliverance from hell, sign me up, right? That's how I took that. And then it says, but then we see that Jesus wants to lead us as our captain into the promised land, and there's giants there. There are giants who live there for decades. And this is the quote that stood with me. There's a temptation when we see such giants to turn back. And we have a choice before us, a life of comfort as a slave or a life of freedom as a warrior. The devil wants us to accept a happy medium between Egypt and the promised land. And that really spoke to me, that the devil's always trying to get us to accept some happy medium between Egypt and the promised land. And that line that there's a temptation when we see such giants to turn back, it spoke to me as well. Because the thing is, what is the happy medium between Egypt and the promised land? It's not happy, actually. It's the wilderness. That the happy medium between Egypt and the promised land was not a good place. It was the wilderness. And I was thinking about that. I mean, in the New Testament, we're given the nation of Israel as a picture of our life with God. And there's a lot of types there that we can draw knowledge from. And we see that the nation of Israel was delivered from slavery, and all of the Egyptian army was drowned in one fell swoop in the Red Sea. And Brother Zach teaches that that is a picture of our old man being put to death on the cross of Jesus Christ. But then they crossed another river, the River Jordan, and when they entered the promised land, all of the giants in the promised land weren't drowned. They were commanded to kill each and every giant. And it's a good picture for us because Israel refused, in a sense. That's why they ended up spending 38 years wandering around the wilderness. They thought deliverance from sin was victory is going to come in one fell swoop. Now that I'm a Christian, I shouldn't face difficulties. There should be no more lust in my flesh to kill, no more anything. I should be content, right? And that's what Israel thought. They were delivered from Egypt and they thought, okay, that's it, right? And when they saw giants in the land, they thought, this isn't what I signed up for. And they shrank. And it spoke to me. What we heard last summer really spoke to me because we can have that same sense of, this isn't what I expected when I signed up. I wanted deliverance. I didn't know I'd have to actually become a warrior. I didn't know I'd actually have to maintain a soldier's attitude. And we've seen that just like the Israelites, I think we have all had this experience, just like the Israelites wandered in the wilderness, never fully possessing what God intended for them for over 38 years because they didn't know that there were giants. We too can wander, coming short of the fullness of the life that God has for us, not really entering in the actual experience of the abundant life that Jesus came to purchase for us. And we do that because we're reluctant soldiers. We want him to do all the dying. We don't want to be a soldier. We don't want to have to display any courage. And we may not have known that we were called to be soldiers when we signed on, but the life of the soldier is the only way to experience the abundant life that Jesus Christ offers. That's it. If I'm not willing to be a soldier, I will never enter the promised land. And I'd like to share a few lessons. As I thought about it, a phrase came to my mind: unlikely soldier. Some of us may not have realized that we were enlisted, or that a fight was required of us when we started, and we find ourselves in this position of we're unlikely soldiers. And I was encouraged as I was meditating on this message of every last giant by a few pictures I saw of unlikely soldiers in the Old Testament, because I think they've taught me a little bit about their fight as unlikely soldiers, what it teaches me about my calling as a disciple soldier of Jesus Christ. And one thing I noticed, there are three unlikely soldiers that I wanted to share some reflections about briefly, but one thing I noticed is that each of them showed me a couple of things. One, they showed me a subtle deception that can tempt me or can try to trick me. And they also showed me a characteristic that ought to define my service as a soldier today in the Lord's army. So the first unlikely soldier I want to show you is in Joshua. Turn to Joshua 12. And you might be thinking, Jeremy, Joshua was a soldier all of his life. What do you mean he was an unlikely soldier? And that's one thing that struck me, actually. If you look at Joshua 12, the end of Joshua 12, the second half, verse 7, it says, "These are the kings of the land whom Joshua and the sons of Israel defeated beyond the river Jordan." And then it lists 31 kings. This amazing, this basically represents most of Joshua's life work. I mean, he was an attendant to Moses, but once he took charge, this is a summary, this is his resume of CEO of the nation of Israel, so to speak, as the leader of the nation of Israel. And at the end of it, in verse 24, it says, all in all, he defeated 31 kings. And you think he's nearing, it says now Joshua's old and advanced in years in 13:1. You think, okay, now's the time that he gets to kind of take a break, right? Now's the time that he's been fighting all his life. He's won 15 times more victories than his predecessor Moses. You think now's a chance that he can relax. And that's what spoke to me about him being an unlikely soldier. He's got this astounding record of victories, and yet what we see in verse 13:1, chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "The Lord said to him, 'You're old and advanced in years. Now lay back and relax.'" It's not what he says. He says, "Very much of the land remains to be possessed." What I took from this is the Lord was saying to him, just because you've been fighting a long time doesn't mean you can stop fighting. Just because you've experienced lots of victories in the past doesn't mean you get to sit back in the easy chair. And the question in my mind is, and the question that I think can plague me as a soldier in the new covenant is, do I still have to fight? I've been fighting a long time. I've won a lot of victories. You've led me a lot of victories. Surely I can sit back and relax at some point, right? Absolutely not. The picture of Joshua, what it gives to us is a picture of refusing to be complacent. No matter what our attainment in the Christian life, no matter how long we've been walking with him, no matter what our track record, no matter what ground we've covered, we have to never settle for anything less than full possession of the abundant life that God purchased for us on the cross. And even if I become old and advanced in years, the message isn't sit back and relax. Paul said, one thing I do, Philippians 3, I press on. And just like Joshua, he saw that just because he had amassed a bunch of victories in the past, it doesn't mean that he gets to relax. He keeps fighting. And Joshua's an unlikely soldier to me because surely at 80 or however old he is at this point, you'd think he doesn't have to be a soldier anymore. That's never the case. And for me in the New Covenant, one lesson I learned here is no matter how long I've been walking with the Lord, I have to press on. As soldiers, we have to fight. As soldiers in the Lord Jesus' army, we have to fight every tendency to be content with what we've already achieved. And we have to be relentless in our desire to capture every single square mile of the promised land. And the characteristic that Joshua illustrates for me is that of progress. Soldiers in the Lord's armies have to be marked by a constant progress. The second unlikely soldier that I saw in the Old Testament is Nehemiah. If you turn to Nehemiah 4, he's the king's cupbearer. He's got a very senior role, and he gets, in the leading kingdom in the world, you'd expect He's a delegate, maybe sent to make a negotiation. Surely he doesn't have to be a warrior. But the picture I see of Joshua as I study the book of Joshua, as we did it, is a picture of watchfulness. He's always on the alert. If you look at Nehemiah 4, sorry, did I say Joshua? I meant Nehemiah. Nehemiah 4, the last verse of Nehemiah, it says, so in verse 23, neither I, my brothers, my servants, nor the men of the group who followed me, none of us removed our clothes. Each took his weapon even to the water. And what spoke to me here is this question, this deception. Do I really have to fight right now? Joshua's about, after I fought this long, surely I can take a break. But this deception is different. What this says to me is, no matter what else is happening, no matter what business I have to attend, it looks like they're just going to take a bath in the river. They have to bring their swords even there. And what that speaks to me is that no matter what time it is, no matter what else is happening, no matter who I'm with, no matter where I am in the world, I always have to maintain this vigilance that a soldier displays. There's a quote from a long time ago that says, vigilance is the price of freedom. Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. And I see this vigilance with Nehemiah, that he's always on guard. It says earlier in chapter 4 that even while they're building, they've got bricks in one hand and a sword in the other hand. And we can think in our lives that surely I can kind of take a weekend from this fight. I can kind of take it when I'm on vacation. I don't know if you've ever had this temptation. Do you find that in vacation you go backwards? I have found that before. Do you know why? It's because I have this subtle belief that when I'm on vacation from everything. And yeah, I don't have to work, and I also don't have to fight sin. No, that's not right. A soldier in the Lord Jesus' army always has to fight. And there's never a time, no matter where I am, no matter what time it is, no matter who I'm with, there's never a time that I can't be marked by this preparedness. I always must be prepared for an attack. And just like Joshua shows us that we always have to be marked by progress, Nehemiah shows me we always have to be marked as soldiers in the Lord's army by a sense of preparedness. The third soldier that spoke to me is 1 Samuel 17. Let's look at the life of David. This verse really spoke to me this week. It's when David, he's going to deliver his brothers some food, and he overhears the Philistine taunting. If you look at 1 Samuel 17 and verse 46, he's heard earlier in the chapter, Goliath's taunting them, and he's indignant. He says, hey, somebody going to do something about that? And everybody's saying, yeah, he's been doing it all along. And King Saul's offering a ransom for whoever is able to do this. And at one point, he gets the courage. He's going to fight this battle. And the thing that spoke to me, I see David as a picture of vision. Look at what he says. When he's going to fight Goliath, look at what he says. Verse 45, he says, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give your dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the air. Look at why. His playing field is so much bigger than this battlefield. This amazes me. Look, end of verse 46, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. He sees his life as a stage for God to display his glory in the whole earth. David's a soldier of vision. And he's an unlikely soldier. Why? Because he's just a teenager. He's not supposed to be at war. He's just delivering food to his brothers. But he hears someone mocking God, and he says, forget it. This guy can't mock God. I'll fight him. And the question that this reminded me of is, I think a lot of times we can say, do I have any business fighting this battle? This isn't my battle. Surely somebody else is going to fight. Surely somebody else will defend the name of the Lord in this case. Right? It's just my job to bring food. I'm just an errand boy. And what the Lord's saying is, no. Will you be consumed with a passion for my name? And when you see that my name is being dishonored, is it a call to arms for you? Even when you don't think it's your battle. Even when you don't think that you're being called to the battlefield. Are you passionate? That's the characteristic I see. David shows us one of a passion for the name of the Lord. He's marked by passion. And what spoke to me is that he's willing to enter the ring full of confidence that God would grant the victory, even over the giants that was terrorizing the rest of the nation. Think about how many experienced soldiers there were in the army of Israel at this point. And this giant Goliath was terrorizing everyone else, but this boy who had a passion for God's name could not put off his passion to do something about it. And even though this giant was terrorizing everyone else, David said, I will fight. And as soldiers, we have to fight every tendency to think, this isn't my battle, I'm not ready yet, and refuse to settle when there's a known giant taunting God in my land. We have to be marked by the same sense of passion for God's name that David demonstrates. And I was thinking, especially as this example of David reveals, I want to remember the stage that I'm playing on as well, because it's tempting to think, I'm alone in a room. I'm just with these three people, or whatever it is, right? Surely no one's really noticing. But what Paul says in Ephesians 3:10 is that the Lord wants to demonstrate his manifold wisdom through the church to every power in the heavenly places. And the Lord was encouraging me through this example of David. David, this teenager, says, I'm going to fight you so that the whole earth will know. And that the Lord was searing that on my heart. Will you have that same attitude? Will you see the stage that you're playing on? I want to manifest my wisdom and power to the heavenly places. You aren't alone. It's tempting to think you're alone right now and you can decide, I'm not going to be a soldier. You're not alone. You have an opportunity to put the life and power and wisdom of God on display as you choose to fight sin. And I want to be marked by that same passion as well. I know I said 3 unlikely soldiers, but I want to share one fourth one. As we think about fighting every last giant, there's one other unlikely soldier that I think that we must always look to. If you turn to Hebrews chapter 7. Speaking of Jesus is the other soldier we have to always consider. And the reason that I think he's an unlikely soldier, obviously, is because it looks like he's already fought his battle. He's already won. He's defeated the enemy. He's ascended to heaven. It's easy to think of him as someone who has every reason to relax. And yet what Hebrews 7 verse 25 tells us is just the opposite. It says, Jesus is able to save forever to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, because he always lives to make intercession for them. And I have to see that Jesus has not put down his sword. I remember when Brother Zach, when we were listening to the sermon on Joshua and through the Bible, and one thing he said was Joshua with his javelin raised is a picture of the Lord Jesus. And I thought at the time when I listened to that message, that's not the image of Jesus that comes to my mind, one of javelin raised, one of fighting. And the Lord encouraged me then, and he encouraged me as I was thinking about this message today to remember that. When I look to Jesus in heaven, I need to see him as one who is constantly waging war on my behalf. It says he ever lives to make intercession for me. And I was thinking about, when I look and I see Jesus with his hands raised with a soldier's posture, I was picturing Joshua on the battlefield looking and seeing Moses with his hands raised. You know the story in the Old Testament where Moses raises his hands, and every time he's praying, the nation starts winning, the nation of Israel being led by Joshua. And every time his hands get tired, they start losing. And I was thinking that my battle is similar. But there's one big difference. Moses got tired. Jesus never gets tired. And Jesus' hands never fall. And I have to be able to see that I cannot lose as long as I don't stop fighting. It's impossible. I mean, Israel would have never won the battle if Joshua and the army hadn't decided to go fight, right? Definitely not. They never would have won the battle. But they only started losing whenever Moses' hands went down. I will never lose the battle so much as I choose to be a soldier and remain on the field and never give up. And I always can look to my captain and see he still has his hands raised. He's never tired. He's always fighting. He ever lives to make intercession for me. He always lives for that purpose. So as we consider this new covenant that we have entered into with Jesus, not just the hope that we'll go to heaven, but that he will save us from all of our sins. We have to fight, as we learned from Joshua, we have to fight all thoughts of resting content regardless of how much progress we've made. As we see with Nehemiah, we have to fight all thoughts that maybe I don't have to be on guard right now. Maybe I can put my sword down just to take a break for a minute. And as we see from the life of David, we have to fight all thoughts of thinking, this isn't my fight. This isn't my battlefield. Somebody else will surely defend the name and the honor of the Lord in this situation. And as we're considering those things, we can be constantly progressing. We can always be prepared. We can always be passionate for our lives to proclaim the glory of God on the biggest stage imaginable, no matter who's watching that we can see. And as we heed our calling as soldiers of Jesus Christ, we can be full of confidence as we keep looking at Jesus, because his hands are always raised in intercession for us. So we never have to be intimidated. It can seem, as we consider, as we realize when we've been called in this new covenant to a battle, it can seem intimidating. But when we look to the author and perfecter of our faith and see that he's not stopped fighting, we can be full of hope, because he's promised that he is able to keep us from falling, and he is able to make us stand in his presence, blameless. That's 1 Thessalonians 5, with great joy. And so we can fight, and even as we consider these giants, which make us feel like grasshoppers, we never have to be afraid, because his promise is so much greater than any one of the giants that we face. So I'm thrilled that the Lord has called me to be a soldier. I'm thrilled that he's opened my eyes to the calling of his in the new covenant, even though I honestly, it's so much more than I ever thought I signed up for when I signed up for it. I would not go back to Egypt for anything. And I have no desire to continue wandering in the wilderness. I am dead set on entering into the full possession of every single square inch of the promised land that the Lord has marked out for me by his grace.